In 1804, the Ottoman Empire had ruled Serbia for more than 300 years. 300 years of janissaries, of taxes paid in children, of villages burned for sport, of men impaled on stakes along the roads as warnings to others. The Serbs had risen before every time they had been crushed. Every leader who had tried had ended up dead, head on a spike, body in a ditch, name forgotten within a generation. Then came a man named George Petrovic. The Ottomans called him Kara, Black George, not because of his appearance, because of what he did to his enemies, because of the specific, methodical, absolute way he destroyed everything that stood between him and a free Serbia. The Ottomans had a word for men like him. The word meant something between wolf and devil, a force that could not be reasoned with, could not be bought, could not be frightened into submission. He was born a peasant, he died a legend, and in between he did something that 3 centuries of Serbian resistance had failed to do. He won. This is the story of Karadjordje, the Black George, and the revolution that should have been impossible. What triggered the revolution was not ideology. It was not a political movement or a declaration of rights. It was something simpler and more brutal than that. It was 4 men who went too far. The Dahije were renegade Janissary commanders who had seized control of the Belgrade Pashaluk in 1801. They ruled not by Ottoman law, but by pure terror. They taxed villages into starvation. They burned churches. They took whatever they wanted from whoever had it and killed anyone who objected. And then, in January 1804, they made a mistake that would cost them everything. Fearing a Serbian uprising, the Dahije decided to eliminate the threat before it began. They sent soldiers to every Serbian village with a list of names, the most respected, most influential Serbian leaders, the men the people listened to, the Gnazovi, the elders, the ones who could organize resistance. They killed 72 of them. In a single week, heads displayed on stakes at the gates of Belgrade as a warning. It was not a warning, it was a declaration of war. The Serbs who had been uncertain became certain. The ones who had been afraid became something else entirely. They gathered in the forest of Oreshak on February 14, 1804, and they chose a leader. They chose the man who frightened them most, because they needed someone the Dahije would be more afraid of than they were. They chose George Petrovic. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Karadjordje was, not the legend, the man. He was born in 1768 in the village of Viševac. His father was a peasant. He had no formal education, no military training, no political connections. What he had was something that cannot be taught and cannot be bought. He had the specific quality that makes ordinary men follow another man into situations where following is almost certainly death. He had already killed his own father, not out of cruelty. His father had tried to surrender to the Ottomans during an earlier uprising, and Karadjordje, 20 years old, had shot him rather than allow it. Whether this story is exactly true or has grown in the telling over 2 centuries is debated. What is not debated is that every Serb of his time knew the story, and that they chose him anyway, because a man who will not allow surrender, not from his enemies, not from his allies, not from his own blood, is exactly the kind of man you want leading a revolution that has no room for surrender. He stood over 6 feet tall in an era when most men did not. He had dark eyes that contemporaries described consistently as the eyes of a man who had already decided the outcome of whatever was about to happen. When the assembly at Oreshak chose him, he wept. He said he was not the right man. He said others were better suited. Then he accepted, and he never looked back. The first Serbian uprising began not with a battle, but with an execution. Karadjordje's first act as leader was to find the nearest Dahije commander, a man named Mehmed Aga Focic, and kill him. This was not symbolic. This was a message delivered in the only language the Dahije understood. It said, "We are not petitioning, we are not negotiating, we are not asking for anything, we are taking it." Within weeks, Serbian fighters were attacking Ottoman positions across the Pashaluk. They had almost no weapons, no artillery, no trained soldiers. What they had was the specific military genius of Karadjordje, who understood something that formally trained commanders often don't, that terrain and speed and the willingness to die can defeat numbers and equipment if used correctly. He fought in the forests. He avoided open ground where Ottoman cavalry would destroy his infantry. He hit and withdrew. He cut supply lines. He made every Ottoman advance costly enough that commanders began to calculate whether the cost was worth it. By the summer of 1804, the Dahije were dead, hunted down one by one, their heads sent to the Ottoman Sultan in Constantinople as proof that the Serbian rebels were not enemies of the empire, only of the renegades who had corrupted it. It was a political masterstroke. It bought time, it created ambiguity, and Karadjordje used every day of it to build something that had not existed in Serbia for 3 centuries, an army. The Ottoman Empire eventually understood what was happening in Serbia. The Dahije were gone, yes, but the Serbs were not laying down their weapons. They were building fortifications. They were training soldiers. They had taken Belgrade in 1806, the city that was the heart of Ottoman power in the region, and they were not giving it back. This was no longer a local uprising against renegade commanders. This was a revolution, and the empire sent an army to end it. The Battle of Mishar in August 1806 should have been a Serbian defeat. The Ottoman force was larger, better equipped, and commanded by experienced officers. The Serbian position was exposed. The odds were not close. What the Ottomans did not account for was Karadjordje. He placed his cavalry on the flanks in positions the Ottomans did not know about. He waited until the Ottoman infantry had committed to the assault, and then he hit them from 3 sides simultaneously, front, left, right, with everything he had. The Ottoman army broke, not retreated, broke. Thousands killed or captured in a single afternoon. The commander who survived wrote to Constantinople that he had never seen infantry fight with such complete disregard for their own survival. He was right. They were not fighting for survival. They were fighting for something they had not had in 300 years. The specific fury of people who have been told they cannot win and have decided to prove it. What the Ottoman army could not do, politics did. Serbia under Karadjordje had become something remarkable, a functioning state with laws, courts, a senate, a school system, and an army that had defeated the greatest empire in the region twice. It was imperfect, and it was brutal, and it was held together largely by Karadjordje's personal authority, but it existed for the first time in 3 centuries. Serbia existed as something more than a province to be taxed and forgotten. Then Napoleon invaded Russia, and the world changed. Russia, which had been Serbia's great protector and the power that had given diplomatic cover to the uprising, suddenly needed every resource it had for its own survival. The Treaty of Bucharest in 1812 ended the Russo-Turkish War and left Serbia completely exposed. Without Russian support, without weapons, without allies, the Serbian position collapsed within 2 years. In 1813, the Ottomans returned in force. The Senate that Karadjordje had built abandoned him. His commanders surrendered one by one. The army that had beaten the empire at Mishar dissolved. Karadjordje crossed the Danube into Austria with a handful of followers in October 1813. He did not weep. He did not beg. He looked back at the Serbia he had built and lost and said nothing that anyone recorded. He spent the next years in exile, planning his return, waiting for the moment, certain it would come. He was right. He was also running out of time. Karadjordje was murdered in 1817, killed in his sleep by men sent by his former ally Miloš Obrenović, who was building his own power in Serbia and could not afford the return of the man who had started the revolution. His head was sent to Constantinople as a gift. This is how revolutions often end, not with the death of the cause, but with the killing of the man who embodied it by someone who wanted to continue that cause on their own terms. But something strange happened. Miloš Obrenović continued the work. The The second Serbian uprising succeeded where the first had not. Serbia gained autonomy, then independence, then recognition as a sovereign state. The thing that Karadjordje had started, that impossible, outnumbered, outgunned revolution in the forests of Šumadija, actually finished. It just finished without him. His skull was returned to Serbia in 1878. It is in the monastery of Krušedol today. 2 centuries after the assembly at Orašak, the dynasty he founded, the Karadjordjević dynasty, sat on the throne of a unified Yugoslavia. The peasant from Viševac who wept when they chose him, and then never surrendered to anything. He said he was not the right man. He was the only man.